So, the Rings of Power. That was a train wreck. I just watched that finale, the final episode of season 1, just a few minutes ago, and I was like, so delighted. It was so good for the wrong reasons. I couldn't stop laughing. Like, the entire season leading up to this finale had been so bad, but actually kind of enjoyable, again, for the wrong reasons, like for being cringy and ridiculous and sort of wrong, like essentially wrong. Like, it felt wrong. The entire season felt almost bad, like something rotten, something that is really false and not genuine, not real, super fabricated, super artificial, like sugar coated. I hated every character. Every single character was like so perfect and so diverse, and like all of the elves are gay now for some reason. Elrond is gay, and all of the elves are dressed like Walter Mercado, dressed like women, and then just all of the characters, the female characters are insufferable. I want them to die. Horrible, horrible deaths. And then the male characters are so wimpy or just kind of characters, just very, very bland or stupid. Not a single interesting character throughout an entire season of television. Everything was so bad in this show. Everything and everyone. I think that really it all comes down to this feeling. It feels like this show was written by illiterate people for illiterate people, or at least maybe not illiterate. That's like too harsh a word, but it certainly feels like the people who wrote this show don't read. They don't read books. And I do think that you need to have that skill if you are a writer, if you are a storyteller, because, this show really, if anything else, if nothing else, this show really proves that you can have production design and good like camera work and special effects. Not all the time, but most of the times, pretty good special effects and sweeping, enveloping music. But if you don't really have a decent backbone or storytelling there, you don't have anything. And this show really proved that. It was a nothing show. It was much worse than The Wheel of Time. And The Wheel of Time was like really bad, but this just hit another level, another low. Anyway, I don't even want to discuss the Rings of Power show because I've been tuning in every single Friday, and every single Friday I've been disappointed, let down. Actually, that was more towards the beginning of the season. After episode 4, I just started enjoying it for the wrong reasons. It became so cringy and so ridiculous and so detestable and so preposterous. And that fucking dwarf woman, I just want her to die. She's like the most annoying, like Jar Jar Binks character that I've ever seen in television in a while. Oh, I just hated everything in this show. I think it was produced and done by the wrong people for the wrong reasons in the wrong way. So the only good thing that came from watching the atrocity that was the Rings of Power was that it got me to finally read the Silmarillion, the real deal. Of course, the Rings of Power is not even remotely based on the Silmarillion, but you get what I mean. So let me tell you a brief story about myself and the Silmarillion. I have had this copy of the Silmarillion So my dad got me this illustrated copy in Spanish of the Silmarillion when I was, let's say 23 3 years ago, maybe 22, 23 years ago, and this book has been sitting in my shelf for that period of time, not being read. I just never really, I was never really a big Tolkien fan. I really enjoyed The Lord of the Rings, the books, then the movies, even though they are very different. I value and enjoy both of them for different reasons. Like the Lord of the Rings books, which, you know, they are the real deal for me. They have that kind of historical texture, that kind of slow burning, that slow burn, that nice sort of rhythm to it. I just really, really love the books. And then the movies are very action-packed and very spectacular. They are very, very different in my opinion, but I enjoy both of them. Then I also really loved The Hobbit, the book, because the movies are like a video game. I don't like video games. I have no interest in video games whatsoever. I want to read books or watch movies, not video games. That's just not my taste. I don't enjoy them. So, but I never really got interested into, you know, the Tolkien lore. I never really felt like I needed to know more or have more background about, you know, the history of Middle-earth and all of that. But I always was interested in like, the Silmarillion, what is it really about? Could I enjoy it? Is it for me? Is it not for me? It's kind of a book that people really love or really don't like. And so I finally plucked up the courage to read it, because like halfway through the season of The Rings of Power, I was just like aghast. I was like, come on, you can't be serious. I need to go back and read Tolkien. Like, I need the only elixir, the only antidote to The Rings of Power can only be Tolkien himself, the real deal, the real thing. So I plucked up the courage and I read the Silmarillion, and these are some of my thoughts. Again, this is not like a real review of the Silmarillion. It's not an in-depth video talking about the Silmarillion. If you are expecting that, you will be very disappointed by this video. I am no Tolkien expert. I am not even like remotely expert or learned in anything Tolkien, but I do consider myself a Lord of the Rings and Hobbit fan. More the books than the movies, honestly. But you know, this video really is about me being so disgusted by The Rings of Power that it actually got me into finally picking up the Silmarillion. So I really thank that show for that, because that's something that I've been trying to do for the past 22, 23 years. And The Rings of Power did it for me. So thank you, Amazon. Anyway, so what did I make of the Silmarillion? Again, disclaimer, I am no expert. This is not a Tolkien lore channel. I am just one reader. I just read books, a variety of books. Fantasy is probably my favorite genre, but I don't consider myself an expert on the fantasy genre. But here are my thoughts on the Silmarillion. It's good. It's not great. It has some fatal flaws, I will say. You know, of course, when you approach the Silmarillion, everyone says that you have to approach this book knowing that it's not a novel, it's not a narrative, it's a collection of myths and legends telling the story of Middle-earth and its creation. So I really took this book to be that. That's how I went into it, and I actually really enjoyed it for that reason, knowing that it was not going to give me a complete simple, linear, cohesive narrative, but rather it was more like a mosaic of stories within, the creation and the beginnings of Middle Earth and this world. So I really enjoyed that aspect, that kind of biblical aspect of it, even though I don't enjoy anything religious or anything that feels biblical. I don't like religion. I don't support it myself personally. That's just my opinion. Of course, I respect everyone and their beliefs, but me personally, myself, I don't like reading books that feel like this, very Christian or Christian inspired. But at least I will say that comparing this to the Rings of Power, this book really felt mythical. It felt biblical. It felt superlative. And what I mean by superlative is everything feels heightened. Everything feels sort of like it's just elevated. Everything feels supreme and magnificent and wondrous and awe-inspiring. And you start hearing and watching the story of how these people are created, and the elves and the men and the monsters and the enemies and the gods, and everything feels superlative. And I really enjoyed that. It was like biblical in a way which I don't like, but in a way that I actually enjoyed, or at least appreciated. So I really enjoyed the first couple of stories or chapters within the Silmarillion. Then the book tells the story of the Silmarils and, that kind of more political, like conflict-driven part of the story. And there, I think the book failed for me personally. But then the ending, I really enjoyed. We get to see, about the Rings of Power, and it feels more like a story. So I enjoyed the beginning and the end of this book immensely, but the big middle chunk of the book I thought was very masturbatory from Tolkien. It felt really pointless. It felt really meaningless. It felt pointless, meaningless. I don't know. I feel like this book really sort of gave me a feeling of like the schizoid and obsessive nature of Tolkien himself, probably. You can really feel that. Being a psychologist and psychoanalyst myself, I couldn't help but realizing that this book felt incredibly anal, incredibly schizoid, and incredibly obsessive, like psychologically. So it felt very dry, but sometimes dry in a good way and sometimes in a pointless, meandering way. What I don't like about this book, I think, is that it really doesn't care about you as a reader. It really has no interest except in telling the story of this made-up fictional world. And that's why it's a very schizoid kind of book. It has absolutely no desire of immersing you, the reader, or taking you into account as a reader. And I don't mean that as a bad thing. I just mean that as like, that's the nature of the text. It feels like a text, not like a story. It is more a history book than a fiction book. Of course, it's completely fictional. That's why it's so schizoid. But anyway, I just feel like it's perfectly fine if Tolkien wanted to write this as what it is, a series of historical fictional texts. But I think it didn't really connect with me because it felt almost cold. Not always, but the big middle chunk of the book did. But that's my negative, I guess, opinion of it. But in the end, would I recommend this book? Absolutely. I would recommend it. It was much better than I anticipated. It was much more accessible than I thought it would. Of course, I read it in Spanish, not the original English, which I kind of regret. But, you know, this is the copy that I had for 22, 23 years. So this is what I read, and I enjoyed it. It's actually much more accessible than many people think it is. It's just a little Christian and a little too, you know, like I don't really care about the reader. That's how it felt to me. But yeah, at least it sort of cured me of my Rings of Power problem. And now that I saw the finale for the Rings of Power, I mean, come on. Once you read this glorious superlative thing, you watch that and it's like, oh my God, like how did they get away with this sinful, horrid, rancid piece of garbage? Anyway, thank you, Rings of Power. Thank you, Jeff Bezos. Thank you, Amazon, for making me go back and actually expand my knowledge of Tolkien and feel like a more confident reader, because, you know, that's something that you achieved. You alone, Amazon. 22, 23 years, I couldn't pluck up the courage to actually read the Silmarillion. Now you made me do it. And even though this is a 3-star book for me, not higher than that, it's not a really, really great book. No, it's a good book, but I feel much more confident as a reader. So thank you.